The moment I realized I was invisible in my own family wasn't sudden. It was a slow, quiet erosion, like water carving a canyon through stone. It happened at 13, watching my parents' eyes light up as my sister Rhiannon played violin, their attention skipping over me like a stone across water. I was the afterthought daughter, the shadow to her brilliance. When they emptied my college fund to finance her Everstone dreams, telling me state school was good enough, something crystallized inside me. Not rage, not sorrow, but resolve, hard and unyielding as diamond. They thought my silence meant acceptance. They never understood that some storms build slowly, gathering strength in stillness, before they change the landscape forever. My name is Elle Waverly, and this is how I learned that being overlooked can become your greatest power. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. I never thought of my childhood as unfair until I turned 13. That was the year everything changed, the year I realized I was living in my sister's shadow. My name is Elle Waverly, and for as long as I can remember, my sister Rhiannon has been the sun our family orbits around. I was just there. A distant planet, cold and overlooked. It was my 13th birthday when I first noticed it. Mom had made my favorite chocolate cake, the one thing she remembered I liked, but the conversation at dinner quickly shifted to Rhiannon's upcoming violin recital. Dad beamed with pride as she explained how our instructor thought she could qualify for a prestigious youth orchestra next year. "That's my girl," he said, squeezing her shoulder. "Harvard's going to be fighting to get you." I remember looking down at my half-eaten cake, the candles long extinguished, wondering if anyone would notice if I just disappeared. That was the first night I started writing in my journal, really writing, not just listing what happened that day. I wrote about how it felt to be invisible in your own home, at your own birthday dinner. The words poured out of me, filling page after page with things I could never say out loud. As high school began, the divide only grew deeper. Rhiannon was everything my parents wanted, ambitious, outgoing, and laser-focused on her future. Her bedroom walls were plastered with Ivy League pennants. She practiced violin for hours every day, maintained perfect grades, and still managed to lead the debate team to nationals. Meanwhile, I fell in love with literature and history. I found comfort in stories of people who changed the world quietly, through words and ideas rather than fanfare. My English teacher, Mrs. Lawrence, was the first person who ever really noticed my potential. "Elle," she said after class one day, holding up my essay on the forgotten women of the Civil War, "this is college-level analysis. Have you thought about pursuing history or journalism?" I nodded, a small flame of pride kindling in my chest. That night, I brought home my report card, straight as for the first time, and laid it on the kitchen counter where Mom was preparing dinner. "That's nice, honey," she said, barely glancing at it. Then, like clockwork, Rhiannon got her report card too. All A+s again, and her calculus teacher wrote a special note about her aptitude. I took my report card back, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my journal. Another disappointment to document, another reminder that my best was never quite enough. Our house in Vermont was beautiful in a way that made visitors sigh with envy, a colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch, set against rolling hills that blazed with color each autumn. But inside those picture-perfect walls, there was an invisible line drawn through every room. Rhiannon's accomplishments were displayed proudly, trophies gleaming in the living room cabinet, certificates framed in the hallway, newspaper clippings of her debate victories magnetized to the refrigerator. My achievements, the short story published in the school literary magazine, the history essay contest I'd placed second in, those lived in my bedroom, pinned to a corkboard above my desk where only I could see them. The first real breaking point came during my junior year of high school. College talk had begun in earnest, and everyone was buzzing about applications, essays, and campus visits. One evening after dinner, I worked up the courage to ask about visiting Brindlewood College, which had an excellent history program. "Brindlewood?" Dad frowned, looking up from his newspaper. "Why would you want to go there?" "They have a really good humanities department," I explained, my voice already beginning to shrink. "And scholarships for." "Elle." Mom interrupted, her tone gentle but dismissive. Let's be realistic. You'll just go to a state school, honey. It's more practical for your situation. My situation? I repeated. Mom and Dad exchanged a look, the kind parents share when they're trying to decide how much truth to serve their child. We've been saving for Rhiannon's education since she was born, Dad finally said. Everstone University has been her dream, and you know how competitive it is. The tuition is significant. What about my college fund? I asked, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. You said you were saving for both of us. Another look between them. Mom sighed. We had to make some difficult decisions, Elle. Rhiannon's potential. Well, it's a special opportunity. We needed to consolidate our resources. That night, I learned what they meant by consolidate. They had emptied my college fund, what little there was of it, to supplement Rhiannon's Everstone tuition. My future had been sacrificed for hers without a second thought. The strange thing was, I didn't cry. I'd spent so many nights with tears soaking my pillow that I thought I'd break down, but instead, I just stared at the ceiling, something hard and resolute forming in my chest. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was determination. The next day, I walked into Hell's Cafe where I'd been working weekends and asked my boss, Linda, if I could take on more shifts. You sure, Elle? She asked, eyeing me over her reading glasses. What about school? I'll manage, I said, meeting her eyes directly. I need to save for college. I'm going one way or another. Linda nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across her face. All right then. I could use you for opening shifts before school and closing on weekends. It won't be easy. Nothing ever is, I replied. While Rhiannon filled out applications to Everstone and backup Ivies, though everyone knew she was a shoo-in, I quietly enrolled at Brindlewood College. It wasn't prestigious, but it had a respected history department and was close enough that I could commute and save on housing. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday. I held it in my hands, tracing the embossed logo with my fingertips, and felt a surge of pride so intense it almost knocked me over. I'd done this. Me. No one else. When I told my parents, they nodded vaguely, distracted by Rhiannon's Everstone acceptance package that had arrived the same day, thick with glossy brochures, scholarship information, and a personal note from the dean. That's nice, Elle, Mom said, already turning back to Rhiannon. Now, let's look at the housing options again. Summer passed in a blur of double shifts, textbook hunting, and planning my commute. While my parents took Rhiannon shopping for dorm essentials, new bedding, a mini fridge, a laptop, clothes for every season, I scoured thrift stores for professional clothes and used bookstores for required texts. The day Rhiannon left for Everstone, the whole family drove her to campus. The limestone buildings stood majestic against a clear blue sky, and students with confident smiles strolled across manicured lawns. Rhiannon's dorm room had tall windows and built-in bookshelves. Her roommate, Madison, came from a family with connections to the university going back generations. I helped carry boxes, smiling when appropriate, standing aside as Mom arranged Rhiannon's desk just so, and Dad hung fairy lights around her window. When they hugged her goodbye, there were tears and promises to call every day. That night at home, the house felt emptier than it ever had, despite my continued presence in it. Within days, Rhiannon's social media flooded with photos, smiling in Everstone's marble-columned library, posing with new friends at campus events, studying in sunlit common rooms. She looked radiant, like she'd finally found where she belonged. My first day at Brindlewood was a stark contrast. I drove myself in our old Honda, parking in a crowded lot and walking half a mile to my first class. My tote bag, ripped at one seam from the weight of used textbooks, dug into my shoulder. The campus was modest, the buildings practical rather than impressive, but when I sat down in my first history seminar, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. Here, no one knew me as Rhiannon's sister. No one had expectations based on her accomplishments. I was just Elle, a student with ideas and a voice that deserved to be heard. As weeks passed, I stopped going home on weekends. I picked up extra shifts at a coffee shop near campus, studied in the library until closing, and slowly built a life that was entirely my own. My parents rarely called to check on me. They were too busy staying updated on Rhiannon's college experience, and I found I preferred it that way. One night, as I worked on a paper in the library, surrounded by books and the soft glow of desk lamps, I made myself a promise. Someday they'll see. They'll look at me, really see me, and they'll regret everything. Not because I want to hurt them, but because I need them to understand what they missed. Who they missed? Me. 3 months into my first semester at Brindlewood, I met Asa Williams in the library archives. I was researching women's contributions to war efforts for a term paper when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. "You're hogging all the good primary sources," a voice said, more amused than annoyed. I turned to find a tall guy with warm brown eyes and a faded University of Vermont sweatshirt. His arms were full of books, and he was looking at my sprawling research with undisguised interest. "I wasn't aware there was a limit," I replied, gathering my notes defensively. He grinned, setting his stack down on the table. "There isn't. But I've been watching you collect every decent source on women in wartime for the last hour, and I'm starting to think we're working on the same topic." I raised an eyebrow. Women spies during World War I? Women intelligence officers and covert operatives in both world wars, with a focus on those whose contributions were deliberately obscured from historical record, he countered, sliding a notebook toward me. I glanced at his meticulous notes, impressed despite myself. "Asa Williams," he said, extending his hand. "History major with a minor in political science." "Elle Waverly," I replied, shaking it. "History and English." That day marked the beginning of an unexpected alliance. We started meeting regularly, comparing research and challenging each other's analyses. Asa had a sharp wit and an eye for historical details others overlooked. Unlike most people I'd known, he never filled silences with empty words. He listened, really listened, before responding. One afternoon, as we pored over declassified documents about female codebreakers, Asa suggested something that would change everything. "We should combine our research," he said, tapping his pen against his notebook. "Submit it to that regional history conference Dr. Vaughn mentioned. Invisible Architects. Women's covert contributions to modern intelligence operations." "They never accept undergraduate submissions," I pointed out. "They've never seen our work," he countered with quiet confidence. "What's the worst that happens?" "They say no." To my amazement, they didn't say no. Our proposal was accepted, and suddenly we were preparing to present at the New England Historical Society Conference, the first undergraduates in 5 years to earn a spot. The night I got the acceptance email, my phone buzzed with a notification from the family WhatsApp group. Mom had sent photos of Rhiannon at an Everstone debate gala, looking sophisticated in a black cocktail dress, surrounded by well-dressed peers and beaming professors. The caption read, "Our star representing Everstone at the Chancellor's reception." A flurry of congratulatory responses followed from relatives. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the keyboard, wondering what would happen if I shared my own news. Instead, I set the phone aside and returned to editing our conference paper. Life settled into a demanding rhythm. Mornings for classes, afternoons for research, evenings working at the library circulation desk, and late nights for homework. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, using public computers to save my laptop's failing battery for when I really needed it. But despite the exhaustion, my grades stayed top tier. Asa and I grew closer with each passing week. He had a way of seeing beyond the careful facade I'd constructed, past the quiet, capable student to the storm brewing underneath. "You're not what people expect, are you?" he asked one night as we walked across campus after closing the library. "You're like this thunderstorm hiding in plain sight. All this power just waiting to break loose." It was the first time in my life I'd felt truly seen. Meanwhile, Professor Holland, a Pulitzer-nominated historian who specialized in overlooked narratives, had taken notice of my work. After class one day, she asked me to stay behind. "I need a research assistant for my new book project," she said without preamble. "It's paid. Not much, but something. I've seen your writing, Ms. Waverly. You have the eye for detail this requires." I accepted on the spot. Professor Holland became more than an employer. She was a mentor who pushed me to dig deeper, think more critically, and find my authentic voice. She never praised effusively, but her small nods of approval meant more than any applause. Thanksgiving arrived, and I reluctantly returned home for the long weekend. Rhiannon was already there, holding court in the living room with tales of Everstone's illustrious professors and the important connections she was making. Professor Harrington says I have a real shot at the Beckman Fellowship next year, she announced over dinner. Only 3 students get selected. That's incredible, honey. Mom beamed, refilling Rhiannon's wine glass. You've always been destined for greatness. Dad nodded in agreement. That's my girl, making us proud every day. Later, as I helped clear the dishes, I overheard him talking to my uncle in the living room.
Elle?
I mean, she's doing okay, right? But Rhiannon's changing the world. His voice held that familiar dismissive tone, as if my existence was an afterthought. You know how it is. Some kids just have that special something. I stood in the kitchen, plate stacked in my hands, something cold and hard settling in my chest. That night, I started a blog. I called it Unwritten, Women History Forgot, and published it anonymously. I shared the stories of women whose contributions had been erased or minimized, codebreakers, spies, scientists, revolutionaries, writing with all the passion and insight I'd kept bottled inside for years. To my shock, the blog gained traction quickly. History professors began sharing it. Then feminist publications. Within 2 months, I had thousands of followers and comments from readers around the world who found these forgotten stories as compelling as I did. Still, I told no one. Not my parents, not Rhiannon, not even Professor Holland. The only person who knew was Asa, who had walked in on me working on a post late one night in the library. Why are you hiding behind a pseudonym? He asked after reading my latest piece. This is brilliant, Elle. You should claim it. I shook my head. I'm not ready. For what? Recognition? Success? For disappointment, I admitted. What if I finally do something noteworthy, and they still don't care? He didn't have an answer for that. In January, something unexpected happened. An editor from Historical Perspectives magazine emailed the blog's contact address. Your piece on female cryptanalysts during the Cold War was exceptional. We'd like to commission an expanded article for our spring issue. This would be a paid opportunity. I stared at the email for so long the screen went dark. A major publication wanted my work. Me, Elle Waverly, not Rhiannon. For the first time, I considered publishing under my real name. That same week, rumors began circulating about Rhiannon. A fellow Everstone student had accused her of cheating during an important debate competition, claiming she had used prepared materials when responses were supposed to be spontaneous. Nothing was proven, but her debate professor had begun distancing himself, and the fellowship nomination was suddenly under review. Mom called me in a panic one night, something she rarely did. Your sister's going through a rough patch, she said, her voice tight with worry. Some jealous students are trying to ruin her reputation. It's politics, all politics. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while finishing an outline for my magazine article. She's always been the target of jealousy, Mom continued. When you're exceptional, people want to tear you down. I wouldn't know, I said before I could stop myself.
There was a long pause on the line.
What's that supposed to mean, Elle? Nothing, I backtracked. I hope it works out for her. But the cracks in Rhiannon's perfect facade were beginning to show. When spring break arrived, I reluctantly headed home, dreading the inevitable Rhiannon-centered conversations. But the sister who greeted me at the door wasn't the confident, polished Everstone student I remembered from Thanksgiving. Rhiannon looked exhausted. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there was something brittle about her smile. Her eyes were red-rimmed and heavy, like she hadn't been sleeping. Mom and Dad either didn't notice or pretended not to. At dinner, they prodded her for updates about her classes and the debate team situation, which she deflected with practice phrases. It's being handled, and Professor Harrington says not to worry. I watched her push food around her plate, recognizing the signs of someone barely holding it together. Despite everything, a flicker of concern stirred in my chest. We might have grown up on opposite sides of our parents' attention, but she was still my sister. Later that night, she cornered me in the kitchen as I made tea. For a moment, she just leaned against the counter, watching me. "How do you do it?" she finally asked, her voice so low I almost missed it. "Do what?" "Seem fine with being invisible." The words weren't cruel. They were genuinely curious, maybe even a little envious. I stirred honey into my tea, considering her question. "Maybe I'm not invisible," I said finally. "Just quiet." She looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "I'm not sure I know how to be quiet," she admitted. "I've always been told to be louder, reach higher, shine brighter. And now..." She looked away. "Now I'm not sure who I am when I'm not winning." The conversation was interrupted by Mom calling Rhiannon to discuss summer internship options, but something had shifted between us. A crack in the armor, a glimpse behind the curtain. When I returned to Brindlewood, I threw myself back into my research with renewed vigor. Professor Holland had connected me with the editors at Smithsonian Review, and they were interested in my article on women cryptanalysts during the Cold War. The piece I'd been working on for months, researching meticulously, drafting and redrafting, was finally ready for submission. The day I sent it off, Professor Holland handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on her personal stationery. "Elle, you have found your voice. Now it's time for others to hear it. You're ready. M. Holland." I tucked the note into my journal, a talisman of validation from someone whose opinion I truly respected. Meanwhile, Asa and I received an invitation to present our research at the National Historical Society Conference in Chicago, a far more prestigious venue than the regional conference we'd initially targeted. It was a tremendous opportunity, but the registration fees and travel costs were daunting. "We'll figure it out," Asa insisted, already researching budget accommodations. "This is too important to miss." The week before the Chicago trip, he surprised me with a gift. A navy blue blazer from a thrift store, perfectly tailored to my size. "Professional historian attire," he said with a grin, holding it up for me to try on. As I slipped it on, he stepped back and nodded approvingly. "You belong there, Elle." "Never doubt that." The blazer fit like it was made for me, and for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine standing at that podium in Chicago, presenting our work to a room full of respected historians. No longer invisible. No longer overlooked. About a month before the end of the semester, I got a call from my Aunt Lisa, my mother's sister, and the only relative who occasionally checked in on me. "Just wanted to see how you're doing, sweetheart," she said. "Your mom mentioned you're still at Brindlewood." "I am," I confirmed, not bothering to point out that my mother had made it sound like I was barely hanging on rather than thriving. "Well, I wanted you to know I've been following that blog you write. The one about forgotten women in history." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "Oh, Elle," she laughed gently. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize your writing style? You used to send me your essays in high school, remember? Besides, you used the same email address." Heat rushed to my face. "I haven't told anyone in the family." "I know," she said, her voice softening. "But you should know it's being quoted in university classes now. My colleague at Boston University assigns it to her women's studies students." Pride and anxiety battled in my chest. "Please don't tell Mom and Dad." "It's not my news to share," she assured me. "But Elle, don't hide your light forever. What you're doing matters." After we hung up, I sat on my bed for a long time, staring at the wall. People were reading my work, valuing my perspective. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. The next weekend, Rhiannon showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked worse than she had during spring break, thinner, more fragile somehow. "Can I stay here for a few days?" she asked, clutching an overnight bag. I told Mom and Dad I needed to study with a friend near Brindlewood. I let her in, curious and wary. We'd never been close, and this sudden appearance felt significant. She prowled around my small apartment, taking in the stacks of books, the worn furniture, the bulletin board covered with research notes and conference information. Her eyes landed on a printout of my blog's homepage, pinned to the wall. "What's this?" "Just a project," I said, moving to block her view. But she was already reading, her expression shifting from curiosity to something harder to define. You write about dead women and get claps? Cute. Her voice was sharp with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or envy. They weren't just dead women, I replied evenly. They were brilliant minds whose contributions were erased because of their gender. They deserved to be remembered. And you appointed yourself their champion? She scoffed, but there was uncertainty beneath her mockery. Someone has to be, I said simply. Later that night, after we'd eaten takeout in awkward silence, she finally told me the truth. Everstone had placed her on academic probation. The plagiarism accusations had expanded beyond the debate team. A professor had flagged similarities between her term paper and published articles. They're saying if it happens again, I'll be expelled, she whispered, staring at her hands. Mom and Dad don't know yet. I can't tell them. Why not? I asked, genuinely curious. They'd support you no matter what. She laughed bitterly. You don't get it, do you? They don't love me. They love what I achieve. If I fail... She trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging between us. I wanted to disagree, to defend our parents, but the words stuck in my throat. Wasn't that exactly what I'd felt all these years? That their love was conditional, based on accomplishments rather than simply existing? What will you do? I asked instead. Fight it, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I've always fought. I don't know any other way to be. As she settled onto my couch for the night, I realized something unsettling. For all the advantages Rhiannon had been given, all the support and opportunities, she was as trapped as I had been, just in a different kind of cage. My relationship with Asa had deepened over the semester, evolving from research partners to something more intimate. He made me laugh, challenged my thinking, and saw strength in me when I could only see wounds. But even as we grew closer, I kept creating distance. You're doing it again, he said one night as we sat on the steps outside the library, watching stars appear in the spring sky. Doing what? Pulling away. Every time we get closer, you retreat. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. Talk to me, Elle. I stared at our interlaced fingers, feeling the familiar panic rise. What if this isn't real? I finally whispered. What if I finally succeed, finally create something meaningful, and they still don't care? What if no one does? I care, he said simply. Professor Holland cares. The thousands of people reading your blog care. And someday, your family might too, but even if they don't, does that make your work any less valuable? Does it make you any less extraordinary? Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice tight with panic. Elle, have you heard from your sister? She's not answering her phone, and we just got a letter from Everstone. The next morning brought the news that shattered our family's carefully constructed illusion. Everstone University had expelled Rhiannon for academic dishonesty. Multiple instances of plagiarism had been documented, despite warnings and probation. My parents were devastated. Dad immediately contacted lawyers, convinced that his golden child had been wrongfully accused. Mom spent hours on the phone with university administrators, alternating between pleading and threatening. They mortgaged part of the house to pay for legal representation, determined to fight the decision. Through it all, Rhiannon stayed with me, curled on my couch in a state of numb shock. She didn't fight, didn't defend herself. She just stopped. Did you do it? I finally asked her directly, late one night when neither of us could sleep. She stared at the ceiling for a long time before answering. Not at first, she said quietly. But then, yes. When things got hard, when I couldn't keep up with everything everyone expected from me, I took shortcuts. And once you start, it's hard to stop. I nodded, not judging, just listening. You know what's funny? She continued, her voice hollow. I was so jealous of you. You built your own life, on your own terms. No one's expectations crushing you. No one's dreams to fulfill but your own. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those years I'd envied her the attention, the opportunities, the support, and she'd envied my freedom. While my family grappled with Rhiannon's fall from grace, I received a letter from Brindlewood's academic committee. I'd been nominated as the year's valedictorian, an honor I never expected and couldn't quite believe. I kept the news to myself, tucking the letter away, with Professor Holland's note. One more accomplishment hidden, one more achievement in the shadows. But as graduation approached, I found myself standing at a crossroads. Continue as I always had, quiet, overlooked, but steady, or finally step into the light, claim my voice, and let the world see who Elle Waverly really was. The choice, for once, was entirely mine. The weeks leading up to graduation felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Behind me lay the safe, familiar path of invisibility. Ahead stretched a terrifying, exhilarating free fall into the unknown, into being seen. Rhiannon had gone back home after her expulsion became official. The lawyers my parents hired couldn't overturn Everstone's decision, despite the small fortune they spent trying. Our family WhatsApp group, once filled with her triumphs, had fallen eerily silent. 3 days before my graduation ceremony, Mom finally called. "Elle, we need to discuss this weekend," she said, her voice tired and thin. "We're attending Rhiannon's private ceremony on Saturday morning." I frowned, confused. Private ceremony? Everstone agreed to let her walk in a separate, small ceremony for special circumstances students. The euphemism hung awkwardly between us. It won't be the same as the main commencement, of course, but at least she'll have something. Of course, they would find a way to make Rhiannon's graduation happen, I thought. They'd move mountains to preserve the narrative they'd built around her, even now. "I have my own graduation on Saturday," I reminded her. "At Brindlewood. I'm walking at 2 o'clock. There was a pause, followed by a sigh. "Elle, you understand how difficult this is for your sister, don't you? This private ceremony is all she has left." The familiar sting of being an afterthought bloomed in my chest, but this time it was accompanied by something new, a calm, steady resolve. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice even. "You should be there for Rhiannon. I'll be fine on my own." After we hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the valedictorian notification letter I'd kept hidden. Next to it lay another envelope that had arrived just yesterday, an invitation to receive the Margaret Wilson Award for Outstanding Undergraduate Historical Research at the ceremony. National recognition for my work, selected from submissions across the country. I traced the embossed lettering with my fingertip, wondering if my parents would be proud if they knew. Wondering if it would matter. The sound of knocking pulled me from my thoughts. Asa stood at my door, his expression unusually serious. "I just ran into Professor Holland," he said, stepping inside. "She told me about the award. Why didn't you tell me?" "I'm still processing it myself," I admitted. "Besides, my family isn't even coming to graduation, so it all feels a bit—" "Don't say pointless," he interrupted, his eyes flashing. "Don't diminish this, Elle. Not for them. Not for anyone." He placed a folder on my desk. "I've been thinking about your speech. As valedictorian. I haven't decided if I'm going to use my real name for it yet," I said quietly. "The blog, the research, it's all been anonymous or academic. Once I stand on that stage as me." "Then what?" he challenged. "The world will know Elle Waverly is brilliant?" Sounds terrible. Despite myself, I smiled. "You know what I mean. What if I step out of the shadows and no one cares? What if I finally put myself out there and I'm still invisible?" Asa sat on the edge of my bed, regarding me with that intense focus I'd come to cherish. "You have a choice to make," he said simply. "Speak at graduation under your real name, claim every bit of recognition you've earned, or stay in the shadows." "But Elle?" He leaned forward. "I don't think you're afraid no one will see you. I think you're afraid everyone will." His words followed me through the evening. After he left, I found myself pulling boxes from under my bed, journals dating back to my teenage years, filled with thoughts and observations I'd never shared. Flipping through them was like watching my own evolution, from a hurt child desperate for approval to a young woman finding her own voice. One entry in particular caught my eye, written when I was 13, just after I'd realized my place in the family hierarchy. "Someday I'll matter too. Not because they decide I do, but because I decide I do. I'll make them see me, even if they don't want to. I ran my fingers over the childish handwriting, something crystallizing in my chest. That night, I sat at my computer and began to write the most important piece I'd ever created, my valedictorian speech. The morning of graduation dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a gift. I dressed carefully in a simple navy dress that complemented the thrift store blazer Asa had given me. Professional.
Polished.
Present. When my phone buzzed with a text from Rhiannon, I nearly ignored it, assuming it was something about her special ceremony. But the message surprised me. I'm skipping the pity ceremony.
Coming to yours instead.
Don't tell Mom and Dad. I stared at the screen, a complicated mix of emotions washing over me. Before I could reply, another text arrived. I want to see my sister shine for once. I typed back a simple response. Back row, left side. 1:30. Campus was transformed for the occasion. Chairs lined the main quad, a stage erected beneath ancient oak trees. Faculty in colorful academic regalia milled about, chatting with excited graduates and proud families. I checked in at the registration table, accepting my honor cords with hands that trembled slightly. Waverly, there you are. Professor Holland approached, resplendent in her doctoral robes. Your speech ready? I nodded, patting my blazer pocket where the carefully folded pages rested. I think so. She studied my face for a moment. Nervous? Terrified, I admitted.
Good.
She smiled, a rare full smile that transformed her usually stern features. The things that terrify us are usually the ones most worth doing. At 1:45, I spotted my parents slipping into seats near the back, their expressions a mix of obligation and mild impatience. My mother checked her watch twice in the span of a minute. My father scrolled through his phone, barely looking up at the gathering crowd. They hadn't even told me they were coming. Somewhere behind them, I caught a glimpse of Rhiannon, sunglasses hiding her eyes, sitting alone. Let's get this over with. I heard my mother mutter to my father as I walked past them to join the faculty and honored students at the side of the stage. A familiar coldness spread through my chest, but this time, I welcomed it. It was the final confirmation I needed. The ceremony began with a traditional procession, followed by the college president's remarks and the conferring of honorary degrees. Through it all, I sat straight-backed on stage, my speech burning a hole in my pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. Finally, the dean approached the podium. It is now my great pleasure to introduce this year's valedictorian, a student whose academic excellence, original research, and contributions to historical scholarship have distinguished her as one of the finest minds to graduate from Brindlewood College. He paused, looking out over the audience. Please welcome
Elle Waverly.
The sound of my name echoing across the quad sent a jolt through me. I rose on legs that felt oddly steady, crossed to the podium, and looked out at the sea of faces. Near the back, I saw my parents, their expressions shifting from polite attention to surprise as they realized what was happening. I took a deep breath, unfolded my speech, and began. This is for every girl who was told she wasn't worth investing in. The words rang out clear and strong, silencing the murmurs that had rippled through the crowd. I could feel the audience leaning in, caught by the unexpected opening. 4 years ago, I enrolled at Brindlewood with nothing but determination and a handful of scholarships. My college fund had been emptied to pay for someone else's dream school. My ambitions were dismissed as unrealistic. My potential was deemed less valuable than another's. I looked directly at my parents now, their faces frozen in shock. You called me invisible, but invisibility is just potential unnoticed. I was never less. I was just unseen. The auditorium had gone completely still. I could have heard a pin drop in the silence between my words. While working double shifts to pay my tuition, I founded a history blog that now has readers in 47 countries. While using library computers because I couldn't afford my own, I published research in national journals. While being told I wasn't special enough to deserve investment, I became the person standing before you today. From the corner of my eye, I could see Asa watching from the side of the stage, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Professor Holland sat nearby, nodding with fierce pride. I'm not sharing this to air family grievances, I continued, my voice softening. I'm sharing it because I know I'm not alone. So many of us walk through life being told we're not enough, not smart enough, not connected enough, not special enough to deserve the same opportunities as others. I turned a page, my hand steady now. But here's what I've learned. No one else gets to decide your worth. No one else gets to determine your potential. The world will try to put you in a box, to label you as less than. Your job, your only job, is to prove them wrong. Not for their validation, but for your own truth. I spoke about the women I'd researched, brilliant minds whose contributions had been erased from history. I spoke about finding mentors who believed in me when my own family didn't. I spoke about the quiet power of persistent work and unwavering belief in oneself. As I neared the end of my speech, I looked up from my notes and spoke directly from my heart. Today, as we leave Brindlewood, we carry with us not just degrees, but the knowledge that we are the authors of our own stories. We decide who we become. We determine our own worth. I paused, looking out over the crowd one last time. So to everyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside, your time is coming. Your voice matters. Your potential is limitless. And when you finally step into the light, as I am doing today, the world will have no choice but to see you. Thank you. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the audience, a single person stood up and began to applaud. Then another. And another. Until the entire assembly was on their feet, applause thundering across the quad like a breaking wave. A standing ovation. I stood at the podium, my heart pounding, my vision blurring with unshed tears. I had done it. After all these years of silence, of being overlooked and pushed aside, I had finally been heard. The applause seemed to stretch into infinity. Faculty members nodded approvingly, students whistled and cheered, and parents dabbed at their eyes with tissues and handkerchiefs. I remained at the podium, momentarily frozen by the overwhelming response. In the midst of it all, I sought out my parents' faces. Dad sat rigidly in his chair, his expression unreadable. Mom clutched her purse in white-knuckled hands, her eyes wide with something between shock and dawning comprehension. Neither of them stood. Neither of them clapped. Behind them, Rhiannon had removed her sunglasses. She was on her feet, tears streaming down her face, mouthing two words over and over. I'm sorry. As I finally stepped away from the podium, the dean embraced me, a break in ceremony protocol that only heightened the emotional intensity of the moment. Professor Holland was next, pressing my hands between hers and whispering, "Perfectly done," before guiding me back to my seat. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. When they called me back to the stage to receive the Margaret Wilson Award, the applause renewed, punctuated by whoops and cheers from my fellow students. I accepted the engraved plaque with hands that no longer trembled, smiling at the crowd with a confidence I'd never felt before. After the final benediction, the quad erupted into chaos as families searched for their graduates among the sea of identical caps and gowns. I stood apart from the crowd, watching as students embraced parents, posed for photos, and celebrated their accomplishments. A hand touched my shoulder. I turned to find Professor Holland and the dean, accompanied by a man I didn't recognize. Ms. Waverly, the dean began, "This is Marcus Reynolds from Horizon Documentaries. He was here filming our honorary degree recipient, but was rather impressed by your speech." Reynolds extended his hand. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice warm with genuine admiration. "I'd like to talk to you about a project we're developing on overlooked women in history. Here's my card, call me next week." I accepted the card, feeling slightly dazed. Professor Holland squeezed my arm. "What did I tell you? Ready." As they moved away, other people approached, classmates I barely knew, professors from departments outside my major, even parents of other students who had been moved by my words. Each conversation was a blur of congratulations, questions about my blog, and praise for my courage. "You gave voice to what so many people feel," one mother told me. gripping my hand tightly. My daughter has always lived in her brother's shadow. I'm going to do better after hearing you today. Through it all, I kept glancing toward the spot where my parents had been sitting, but they were gone. They hadn't waited to congratulate me, to meet my professors, to take photos like other families. They had simply left. A familiar hollowness opened in my chest, but it was quickly filled by a new voice. Rhiannon pushed through the crowd, her designer sunglasses now hanging from the collar of her silk blouse. Up close, she looked both younger and older than I remembered. Her face stripped of its usual perfect makeup, her eyes red-rimmed, but clearer somehow. Rhiannon. I wasn't sure what else to say. She hesitated, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in an awkward hug. Your speech, she whispered. I had no idea. I never knew. That was kind of the point, I said, but without bitterness. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. They left. Mom and Dad. They didn't even. She trailed off, looking ashamed. I know. I adjusted my cap, which had gone slightly askew. Did they know you were coming here instead of your ceremony? She shook her head. I couldn't face it. All those pitying looks, the whispers. I wanted to see what you'd built while no one was watching.
A pause.
It's incredible, Elle. You're incredible. Before I could respond, Asa appeared at my side, protective and proud. Everything okay here? He asked, his eyes moving between me and Rhiannon. Yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. Asa, this is my sister, Rhiannon. Rhiannon, this is Asa Williams, my research partner, and… I glanced at him, a smile tugging at my lips. And someone very important to me. Rhiannon nodded, looking between us with understanding. I should go, she said quietly. Congratulations, Elle. You deserve every bit of this. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Rhiannon? She looked back. We should talk sometime. Really talk. A small, genuine smile crossed her face, perhaps the first I'd seen from her in years. I'd like that. That evening, as the sun set over Brindlewood's campus, Asa and a group of my closest friends from the history department gathered at a local restaurant to celebrate. I wore my navy blazer like armor, feeling simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. To Elle, Professor Holland said, raising her glass in an uncharacteristic show of sentiment, who reminded us all today that history is made by those with the courage to step out of the shadows. We clinked glasses, laughter, and conversation flowing freely. For the first time in my life, I felt completely present, completely myself, no masks, no hiding, no diminishing my light to make others comfortable. My phone remained silent. No calls from my parents, no texts of congratulation or apology. Just silence. Asa noticed me checking it and squeezed my hand under the table. You okay? I considered the question, looking around at the people who had believed in me, supported me, seen me when my own family couldn't or wouldn't. Yes, I said and meant it. I really am. Later that night, as Asa walked me back to my apartment, we paused beneath a streetlight, the warm spring air fragrant with honeysuckle and possibility. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. A graduation gift. I unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with a simple lightning bolt design. For the thunderstorm that refused to stay hidden, he explained, his voice soft. For whatever you want to write next. I traced the lightning bolt with my fingertip, thinking of all the journals that had come before, filled with hurt, with hope, with dreams deferred but never abandoned. Thank you, I whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. For seeing me, even when I wasn't ready to be seen. That night, before sleep claimed me, I wrote one last blog post on Unwritten, Women History Forgot, but this time I signed it with my real name. For the girl no one believed in. Be your own proof.
Elle Waverly.
1 year after graduation, I stood on a red circular carpet, facing an audience of several hundred people. The TEDx stage was intimidating, but I felt a calm certainty as I began to speak. What if the greatest gift you ever received was being overlooked? My talk, titled The Gift of Being Overlooked, traced my journey from invisible second daughter to recognized historian and advocate for forgotten voices. I didn't name names or share specific family details. This wasn't about revenge or public shaming. It was about transformation. When no one is watching you, you're free to become exactly who you're meant to be, I told the audience. Without the weight of others' expectations, you can build something authentic, something true. The talk resonated in ways I never anticipated. Within 3 weeks, it had been viewed over 2 million times online. My inbox flooded with messages from people sharing their own stories of being overlooked, underestimated, and eventually triumphant. Life had changed dramatically since graduation. Asa and I had moved into a small cottage near Brindlewood's campus, where I'd accepted a position as an adjunct professor teaching a specialized seminar on overlooked voices in history. The cottage had creaky floors and temperamental plumbing, but it also had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that Asa had built by hand and a garden where I grew herbs and flowers. It wasn't grand or impressive by conventional standards, but it was ours, a home built on mutual respect and shared dreams rather than appearances. My relationship with Rhiannon had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted. 2 months after graduation, I received a thick envelope containing a handwritten letter, 15 pages of raw, honest reflection. I've started this letter a dozen times, and each attempt feels inadequate. How do you apologize for a lifetime of imbalance you didn't even recognize? How do you make amends for benefits you accepted without questioning their cost to someone else? I was pushed too hard to be perfect. Every trophy, every achievement was another bar raised, another expectation to meet. I started to define myself by what I accomplished rather than who I was. And somewhere along the way, I began to resent you, not because you did anything wrong, but because you seemed to survive on your own. You didn't need the spotlight like I did. You kept going, kept building, kept becoming. I'm not saying this to excuse what happened. I made choices, bad ones, and I'm living with those consequences. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see what they did to you, what they did to us both in different ways. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your speech, your truth, changed something in me. For the first time, I'm trying to figure out who I am without the trophies and the accolades. Who Rhiannon might be if she were just enough, exactly as she is. Your sister, if you'll still have me, Rhiannon. I wrote back, and slowly, carefully, we began building a relationship based on who we actually were rather than the roles we'd been assigned. We weren't close, too much water under that bridge, but we were real with each other now, and that mattered more than forced sisterly affection. My parents were a different story. A month after graduation, I received a brief email.
Elle,
We've seen your blog and your graduation speech online. We're proud of what you've accomplished. We hope you're well. Mom and Dad. 3 sentences. No acknowledgement of their role in my struggles. No apology for the years of favoritism. No recognition of the deeper wounds their actions had caused. Just a belated, superficial pride now that others were applauding me. I never responded. Some wounds don't close, and that's okay. Some relationships can't be salvaged, and accepting that fact isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Instead, I channeled my energy into my work. The documentary project with Marcus Reynolds evolved into a 6-part series featuring women whose contributions to science, politics, art, and innovation had been systematically erased from historical record. I served as a historical consultant and wrote 2 of the episodes myself. My book, Quiet Victory: How History's Overlooked Women Changed the World, was published the following spring. It combined meticulous research with personal reflection on the parallels between historical erasure and everyday invisibility. When it hit the bestseller lists, I felt a quiet satisfaction different from the vindication I'd once craved. On the dedication page, I'd written simply, "To the unheard." As my professional reputation grew, I began receiving letters and emails from young women facing their own battles for recognition. I started a mentorship program for girls from underprivileged backgrounds who showed promise in historical research and writing, girls like me, ignored but burning with brilliance. Professor Waverly, Do you think anyone can succeed without support? One of my students asked during office hours, her voice small but determined. Yes, I told her honestly. But the question isn't whether you can, it's whether you should have to. Everyone deserves to be seen, to be invested in, to be believed in. If you don't have that support at home, we'll build it here. One crisp autumn day, almost 18 months after graduation, I visited Brindlewood's campus for a guest lecture. Afterward, I found myself drawn to the main quad where I delivered my valedictorian speech. The stage was long gone, students lounging on the grass where rows of chairs had once stood, but I could still feel the echo of that moment. I walked to the exact spot where the podium had been and stood there, letting the memories wash over me. The fear, the determination, the moment of stepping fully into my power for the first time. You did it, I whispered. The words meant for the 13-year-old Elle who still sat in the back of my mind, the girl who had written in her journal that someday she would matter, someday she would be seen. The truth was, I hadn't needed that standing ovation, though the validation had been sweet. I hadn't needed my parents' approval or recognition, though their absence still ached sometimes in quiet moments. What I had needed, what I had ultimately given myself, was permission to be fully, unapologetically, who I was.
To take up space.
To speak with my authentic voice. To claim my right to be seen and heard. In the end, I didn't just earn their applause. I earned my own. And that, I had come to realize, was the victory that mattered most. As I turned to leave the quad, my phone buzzed with a notification. The National Education Board had selected Quiet Victory for inclusion in next year's recommended curriculum for high school history classes. My work, my voice, would reach a new generation of students, some of whom might recognize their own struggles in my words. I smiled, thinking of how my younger self would have reacted to such news. She would have immediately thought of running home to tell her parents, desperate for their approval, their acknowledgement that she was finally special enough. But the woman I'd become simply texted Asa to share the news, then called Professor Holland, who responded with her characteristic understated pride. Well deserved. What's next? What was next? More research, more writing, more mentoring young women who needed someone to see their potential. More quiet mornings in the cottage with Asa, building our life on our own terms. More honest conversations with Rhiannon as we navigated our new, more authentic relationship. More speaking engagements where I could share the message that had become my purpose. You are enough, exactly as you are. I took one last look at the quad before walking away, a sense of peace settling over me like a familiar weight. The storm that had been building inside me for so many years had finally broken free, not as destruction but as life-giving rain, nourishing not just my own growth, but creating space for others to flourish as well. In my pocket, I carried the leather journal Asa had given me at graduation. Its pages were filling with ideas for new projects, observations about my students, reflections on history, and its echoes in the present. But on the first page, I'd written just one line, a reminder to myself on days when old doubts threatened to resurface. The girl no one believed in became the woman who believed in herself. And that, in the end, was enough. What would you sacrifice to finally be seen? And when that moment comes, will you still need their validation, or will you have found something far more valuable? If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of quiet strength and unexpected triumph.